Digital threats compound daily, with networks absorbing thousands of impacts an hour. Yet the security operations centers defending them operate with empty chairs. A security operations center is the centralized team responsible for continuously monitoring an organization's security posture. When asked why seats remain empty, hiring managers and CISOs point to a systemic talent shortage. A CISO, or Chief Information Security Officer, is the senior executive responsible for an organization's information and data security. They argue that the skilled applicants simply do not exist, right as Gen Z rapidly becomes the dominant demographic in the global labor market. However, the underlying math entirely contradicts the employer narrative. Universities and specialized boot camps are graduating cybersecurity students at record volumes, while employer hiring funnels remain dry. The gap between open roles and available talent is an alignment problem. Outdated, employer-created barriers are repelling the exact younger workforce the industry needs. This chart shows the distribution of the cybersecurity workforce by seniority. Looking at entry points, 31% of teams operate with 0 entry-level professionals. Expanding that scope, 15% also employ absolutely no junior-level professionals. The bottom rungs of the career ladder are completely missing. Employers are applying legacy hiring metrics to early career roles. Demanding 3 to 5 years of prior enterprise experience for a junior position creates a disconnect for a recent graduate holding a degree but no professional resume. Hiring managers have to make a choice. They must trade the convenience of filtering applicants by their paper credentials for the effort of overhauling their recruitment pipeline. The failure starts with a standard job posting. It is common to see a junior analyst role requiring a CISSP and 5 years of experience. The CISSP is an advanced certification designed for experienced security practitioners and managers. Overly strict degree mandates and exhaustive lists of advanced certifications create a paper wall around the security team. Capable Gen Z candidates who possess the required aptitude see these bloated qualifications and simply scroll past the posting. To capture this demographic, organizations must strip these inflated requirements from their postings and focus strictly on core competencies, analytical problem-solving skills, and a willingness to learn. This forces an internal trade-off. Human resources can no longer auto-filter resumes using keyword scanners, meaning the security team itself must invest the time to develop and grade practical technical assessments. It also requires building alternative pathways. Companies must actively recruit from coding boot camps, technical apprenticeships, and self-taught communities, rather than relying exclusively on 4-year university pipelines. Employers must engineer true entry-level positions, roles in governance, risk, compliance, or support tracks that genuinely require 0 prior enterprise experience. Widening the pathway and removing the paper wall shifts the burden of validation from the applicant to the employer, capturing raw talent before legacy competitors even schedule an interview. Once the barriers to entry are removed, employers must align with the second major priority for Gen Z: work-life integration and schedule autonomy. This graphic compares employee values regarding compensation and lifestyle, showing that 79% of younger workers prefer workplace flexibility over higher earnings. Flexibility translates directly to schedule freedom, remote work options, and access to explicit mental health support. Cybersecurity takes a unique psychological toll. Long hours, constant alert status, and the stress of active incident response burn people out. Gen Z candidates view mental health resources not as a perk, but as mandatory infrastructure. Delivering this level of flexibility requires leaders to abandon traditional hours-in-seat management styles and shift entirely to asynchronous, outcomes-based performance tracking. Companies that prioritize well-being and operational flexibility frequently win talent away from higher-paying, rigidly structured competitors. Even with a flexible environment, Gen Z talent requires 2 primary psychological drivers to stay in a role long-term: momentum and purpose. Momentum is the candidate's need to see a clear, documented path for their career progression, starting on day 1. This flowchart illustrates a structured career pathway. Securing momentum requires investments in training, certification support, and cross-functional projects moving a Tier 1 analyst up. But there is a cost. Time spent on early career mentorship causes a temporary dip in senior staff productivity. The second driver is purpose. Job descriptions must stop presenting entry-level roles as purely technical, repetitive duties like reading system logs. Framing the role around its actual impact, protecting sensitive patient data, preventing financial ruin, and defending critical public systems appeals directly to Gen Z's desire for meaningful work. Combining a visible growth path with a purpose-driven mission secures long-term loyalty. This retention justifies the initial loss of senior staff time to mentorship. This matrix maps employer constraints against recruiting strategies. Employers must optimize based on budget and infrastructure. Look at resource-strapped SMBs, small or mid-sized businesses operating with fewer employees and tighter budgets than large corporations. Because SMBs cannot compete with enterprise-based salaries, they must lean heavily into offering extreme schedule flexibility and highly visible, purpose-driven roles. Legacy enterprises face the opposite constraint. They have larger budgets but rigid structures. They must dismantle their inflated HR requirements and deploy their capital to build structured mentorship programs and fund alternative entry-level pathways. Agile startups operate in the final quadrant. Startups must avoid vague promises of a cool culture. To counter Gen Z's fear of startup burnout, they must prove their credibility through explicit mental health support and inclusive hiring practices. Understanding your organizational constraints allows you to weaponize your specific structural advantages in a competitive market. The cybersecurity talent gap cannot be closed using the hiring filters and metrics of 2010. Digital employer branding must reflect these changes. Gen Z researchers employers online quickly. A stale digital presence suggests your organization has failed to adapt. Gen Z brings the digital fluency, adaptability, and fresh perspective the industry needs to combat evolving, complex threats. Winning the next generation of cybersecurity defenders isn't about lowering the bar for talent. It is about lowering the barrier to entry and investing in human infrastructure.